Hello, my name is Damian DelGaizo and welcome to Ski Flying 101. Flying on skis doesn't require a rating or even an endorsement, but it can be a great way to put the fun back in your winter flying. The procedures and techniques that we use in this film are the ones that work for us in the aircraft that we fly. They will not work for every pilot in every aircraft in every set of circumstances. Always follow the manufacturer's operating handbook and recommendations before you attempt anything in this film. And please receive instruction from an authorized flight instructor familiar with these techniques. So let's get started. If you're keeping your airplane tied down outside, it's important that you put a barrier between the snow and the ski. There's lots of different things you can use. I use some 2-inch PVC pipe. It's real easy to transport around if you need to, and you can pull your plane on and off very easily. If you have to move the airplane for any reason while you're not moving, what you want to do is resist the urge to actually get out of the plane and lift the tail by the handle and then try to twist it. Because what can happen is the skis can stay stuck in the snow. You start to twist the fuselage and you can just twist it right off the landing gear. So if you need to move the airplane, it's always best to have a little bit of forward movement going first and then try to make your turn rather than just trying to make a turn from a dead stop. If we need to move the airplane by manipulating the struts at all, you never want to grab the lift strut in the center of the strut because you can bend the struts. So you want to grab the struts near the top where it attaches to the spar and then push or pull based on that. If you need to focus your attention on the skis, it's best to make sure that the engine's not running when you do so for obvious reasons. A couple of things that we need to know before we get going. One is that we have no brakes. The second is that our turning radiuses are going to be much greater than they were on wheels. So we really need to have a plan before we get moving as to what we're going to do, how we're going to get out of the spot, how we're going to take off. We taxi the airplane. The idea is to keep the tail light, but we need to keep the airplane moving so we don't get stuck. So we're going to use some forward stick, and it can be anywhere from neutral to somewhere forward of neutral. And depending on the consistency or the depth of the snow, it may require a fair amount of power just to move the airplane. So you're going to need to play kind of a little juggling act between what you're doing with the throttle and where the stick is. It may require forward stick, lots of power, but we want to avoid a situation where the tail is actually coming up too high. So it may require you at times to work the stick back, and other times you may have to work it forward to try to keep that tail light, yet keep the airplane moving. We have to remember our takeoff rolls are also going to be longer, a minimum of 20% longer, and sometimes 3 or 4 times longer depending on the snow depth or snow consistency. So a heavier, wetter snow is going to require a much longer takeoff run. So when we start to move the airplane, we're going to use some forward stick and power. Generally, the airplane will turn tighter to the left than it will to the right because of the left turning tendencies. So we'll try to plan our turns to the left. So what we're going to do is jink to the right first just to give ourselves some more room, and then we're going to use some forward stick, left rudder, and throttle to make the airplane turn. Now, when manipulating the throttle, it's best to use small but powerful bursts of throttle, kind of a pop, 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 instead of a long continuous power up. This way it'll keep trying to keep our radius smaller. So as we make our turn and we're feeding that rudder in, the other thing that's going to happen is as the airplane turns, because the skis don't have the same grip that the tires do, it's going to start to slide sideways a little bit. And a little bit of side slide is acceptable, but too much side slide can actually damage the airplane. So we want to try to limit the side slide. So we make that turn as the airplane starts to slide sideways. We're just going to add a little bit of outside rudder for a momentary period, and then right back to the inside again. So it starts to slide sideways again, a little bit of outside rudder, then back to the inside rudder. So basically you're going to be kind of doing a little double pump on the rudder. It'll be inside rudder to start the turn, and then a little bit of outside rudder to limit the side slide, then back to the inside rudder. You're really going to kind of segment that turn. If I were going to go for a takeoff roll, then I would start from here. Let's assume we were going to take off in this direction. I would jink my airplane to the right, come back around to the left, and then once I was lined up, go right into my takeoff roll. Now, as far as the stick goes, we're going to start out with a relaxed stick, which will help that tail start to come up right away. But again, what we don't want to really have happen here is have that tail come up too high. The idea is to keep a tail high out of the snow, but nose high attitude. So we want the tail out of the snow, but a slightly nose high attitude. So just enough to keep that tail out of the snow. As the airplane starts to accelerate, what's going to happen is that tail will have a tendency to want to continually rotate up. We really don't want that to happen. So you're actually going to start out relaxing the stick. As the tail starts to come up, you're actually going to have to work a little back stick in against that to try to maintain that nose high attitude. And there's actually a little, what I'll call a sweet spot, if you're in deeper snow, that as the airplane starts to accelerate, you'll actually start to feel the airplane plane up on the snow, and it'll actually start to accelerate. If you pull back too far on the stick, then you'll feel the heels dig in, it'll start to slow down. And if you let the tail come up too high, you'll feel the tips dig in, it'll slow down. So you want to play that stick a little bit and just try to find that sweet spot where you get that acceleration. You won't see that on a hard pack, but if you're on deeper snow especially, it'll be very prevalent. So you'll kind of have you playing that stick a little bit just to hold that right angle so that you can get that acceleration. And then the plane will basically take itself off. If we decide that we're going to make a landing and we're in an area that we're not familiar with, the first thing we want to do is basically drag the field. So I just want to overfly it and just take a look. Is it going to be suitable to land on? Is it going to be long enough and wide enough to make the turns? Then as we come back around, we're essentially going to do a touch and go, or what I call a touch pass. So we're going to touch down, let the skis get on the ground, and just add power to keep the airplane moving at a high enough speed so we can take off again. And we're just going to drag the skis into the snow and just lay down a nice long set of tracks, and we'll just add power and take off again. Then we'll come back around and we're going to essentially mat ourselves a runway. So the second time we come around, we're going to touch down and we're going to try to overlap the tracks. So I'm going to put the one ski down in between the two other tracks, and the other track, this one, will overlap. Touch, add power, run the same length, take off, come back around, and do it again. And we may have to do that several times. The deeper the snow is, the more time you're going to want to spend kind of matting yourself down a runway. This will help us not get stuck. So assuming that we want to land this time, we've matted down sufficient runway, we're going to set up for essentially sort of a soft field landing. So we're going to come in with power and somewhat of a nose high attitude. If you're landing on a hard pack, you can land pretty much power off. So a lot of whether you're going to use power or not is going to be determined by the snow depth. If it's deeper, softer snow, then you're going to want to land with power. So in this case, it's our first touchdown. We're assuming it's fairly soft snow. So we're going to touch down with power, somewhat of a nose high attitude, and then touch down and bring your stick back. As the airplane starts to decelerate, at some point we're going to want to relax that stick. So we're carrying power, the airplane starts to slow down, your stick is back. You want to wait till you're down to basically the speed that you need to be at when you're taxiing. So somewhere between, say, 5 and 10 miles an hour. Our stick is back, the airplane slows down, we're still carrying power to keep the airplane moving. We're going to relax the stick. Now when you relax the stick, if you feel that tail start to come up on you very quickly, then you want to start bringing that stick back, and you need to let the airplane decelerate down to a slower speed. So you're kind of testing the water a little bit. After you touch down, you keep the power in there, start to relax the stick. If you feel as you're relaxing the stick, and do it slowly, that the tail is starting to come up on you, then bring the stick back and wait for the airplane to decelerate to a slower speed. Then you can start to relax the stick. Once the stick is relaxed and you feel comfortable that the tail's not going to pop up on you, then we can make our turn. And the same thing, we're going to jink it to the right and then back around to the left. If the airplane starts to slide sideways, a little outside rudder, and then back to the inside rudder again. Make our turn, we're using forward stick, sharp but powerful blast on the power. The airplane starts to slide sideways, we use a little outside rudder, and then back to the inside rudder again. We're basically going to go right back into our own tracks again, because that snow has already been matted down. If we're taxiing and we're going to encounter a drift or a gully, what you don't want to do is just kind of hit that head on. You don't want both skis going through that at once. So the better thing to do is to approach it on a diagonal, like a 45. This way one ski goes up and out at a time, and go through it that way. And then once you're through, now you can continue to taxi and go into your turn. We'll jink it to the right, then back around to the left, forward stick, pulsing the throttle. Airplane slides sideways, a little outside rudder, back to the inside rudder, slide sideways, a little outside rudder, back to the inside rudder again, back into our own tracks. You don't always have to make left turns. It'll usually turn tighter to the left than it will to the right. But in certain wind conditions, it may be more advantageous to make a turn to the right. So for instance, if we were going to make a turn, but we had a very strong crosswind blowing from this side, then it might be better for me to actually jink left and then make a turn to the right, because that wind's going to help me pivot that turn better. So you really want to think about what the wind's doing, not just automatically go into a left turn. But like I said, most of the time, if all things are equal, a left turn will get you a tighter radius than a right turn. Okay, so we've basically left the airplane in a position from which we can just pretty much just take off again. If we have to leave the airplane for any period of time, the best thing to do is put something under the skis that'll give you somewhat of a barrier between the snow and the skis. May not always be able to do that. So the best thing to do is stop the airplane, let your skis cool down, because just from the movement on the snow, your skis will build up heat, and that could cause them to refreeze when you leave the airplane. So when you stop the airplane, just let the skis cool down for about a minute or two. Then we're going to pull the airplane forward just a few feet, just to an area where you're in some fresh snow. And that'll go a long way towards helping you keep from getting stuck. And again, just to reiterate our takeoff, we're going to start basically with our stick rearward or aft of neutral, start coming up on the power, and then relax the stick. As the airplane starts to move, the tail's going to try to rotate up. And we're going to use a little bit of back stick just to keep the tail out of the snow, but a positive angle of attack. And just kind of let it accelerate. Skis start to plane up, look for the sweet spot, try to hold that angle, and just let it take itself off. Okay, so let's go try some. Before we get started, we've already done the pre-flight on the airplane. We're just going to talk a little bit about the skis and pre-flighting that part of it. These skis are called wheel replacement skis, sometimes known as a straight ski. What that means is that the wheel comes off and you just simply replace it with a ski. They're probably the best performing because there's no wheel protruding, but operationally they take a little bit more work and a little less convenient. Okay, a couple of things that we want to check on the pre-flight on the skis themselves are the ski attach points where it's attached to the fuselage. Right here it's attached to the axle via an axle nut. You want to make sure that cotter key's in there. Also, some other things that you need to check here are the attach points of the bungees and the check cables. You have a bungee right here and a check cable. What the bungee does is help hold the tips up while you're in flight. And the check cable's there in case the bungee snaps so that the ski won't spin around the axle. You want to check where it's attached. There's a fitting here, and you can see there's a bolt here at the landing gear. And you want to take a good look at that to make sure there's no cracks. And these bolts can break very easily, especially in cold temps. And there's lots of side loading when you're on skis. So you need to pay particular attention to the landing gear system and its attach points. You want to take a good look in this area right here where the gear legs meet the shock struts here, and make sure there's no cracks in this particular area. Again, there's a lot of side loading on skis, and these areas can crack out, so you want to take a good look at that as well. The other things you want to do are make sure the bottom of the ski is free of any kind of frozen snow or debris. Anytime you leave the skis for any extended period, you want to have them elevated out of the snow. You can use pine boughs, sticks, little chunks of wood. I've seen people use garbage bags, but anything that'll give you a little bit of a barrier between the ski and the snow. You can run your hand underneath the ski like that with a glove just to make sure, or you can use a piece of cord like this, which works pretty well. You just kind of floss the bottom of the ski just to make sure that there's nothing stuck to the bottom. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just give the ski a little shake too, just to make sure it's not going to be stuck there, so that'll be easy for me to taxi right off of these once I get going. There's also a rear check cable. We can check that. And that does pretty much the same thing as the front check cable. It stops the ski from spinning around the axle in case there's a bungee failure. Okay, the other pre-flight considerations that we might want to think about is obviously you want to have your engine preheated. If it's cold out, do yourself a favor, preheat your engine. Some extra equipment is not a bad idea to bring along with you, and namely some snowshoes and a shovel, which we have right here. This is a really small shovel, but there's not a whole lot of room inside that airplane. If you have more room, take a bigger shovel. The snowshoes can be quite handy. If you get the airplane stuck, you're going to need to dig out a little bit and mat down an area in front of the airplane with the snowshoes, just so you can get the airplane moving, and so it'll plane up on the snow. So they're an invaluable tool to have. A lot of guys will lash them to the struts, but if you can fit them inside the plane, that's the way to go. I'm going to leave the tail tied down till after we get the engine running and warmed up, and then I'll idle it back down and untie the tail. I am not running a tail ski right now because the snow that we're in is fairly shallow, and operationally I'd rather not run the tail ski because I can use that tail wheel as a brake if I need to. So if I need to slow down, I can just pull that stick back, bury the tail wheel, and that'll help slow the airplane down. If you're running in deep snow and you're afraid you're going to sink up to the tail there, then it's a good idea to have that tail ski. But in this case, we're not going to be using it. All right, so we'll get started and let's go ski flying.
Okay, so while we're taxiing, I'm carrying a little bit of forward stick here to keep that tail light. If I needed to slow down, I'd pull that stick back and bury that tail wheel, and that would kind of act like a brake for me. When we go to make our turn, we're going to jink it to the right and then back around to the left with some forward stick. As the airplane turns, the plane's going to want to slide sideways. So what we're going to do is use a little outside rudder from time to time so we limit the side slide. A little bit of power so we don't get stuck. Right back into my own tracks again, right into our takeoff roll. As the airplane gains forward speed, the tail starts to come up a little bit of back stick to hold that nose high attitude. You can feel that sweet spot. We're up on plane, let it take itself off the ground, lower my nose, in the ground effect, and then continue my climb. Okay, as we approach the field that we're going to land on, first thing I'm going to do is drag the field. So I'm going to take a good look at it first to make sure it looks acceptable. So we're going to set up an approach and a touchdown. We're going to essentially make a touch pass. So what we're going to do is let the skis touch down, and I'm just going to lay a long set of tracks, long enough so that I can take back off again after I land. And what we're looking for is several things. One is to get a sense for the depth and consistency of the snow. So if I touch down and it feels like I'm in mashed potatoes, well, then it's going to be really soft and deep and sticky. Maybe I don't want to land there. The other thing I'm going to do is look for any obstacles that might be, hazards that might be under the snow. So as those skis are touching down, if it starts feeling real rough, there might be something that's underneath that, especially if you're in an unimproved area. If you're landing on a frozen lake, after you do your touch pass and you lay your tracks, you want to come back around and take a look back in those tracks and give it a few minutes because it doesn't happen immediately. And just wait to see if those tracks start to turn color. If they turn gray or black, there could be overflow, which is water that's between the snow and the ice, and you don't want to land in that either. So what we're going to do is come down. I'm just going to lay a nice long set of tracks and basically do a touch and go. If the snow were real deep, which this is not, if it were real deep, then what I do is make several passes with several sets of tracks just to kind of map myself down a runway. So I don't get stuck. So if I had deep, soft snow, then I want to do that several times so that I can kind of map myself down a landing area. I'm just going to set up for a normal kind of landing with power, like a soft field landing. I'm just going to carry some power here. And then when we touch down, we're just going to keep that power going and keep the airplane just around flying speed. Now we're just going to lay a nice set of long tracks here. I can get a feel for what that snow is doing. Like I said, if it feels like mashed potatoes, it's going to be soft. And once I feel like I have a nice long set of tracks, I take off again. Like I said, you may want to do that several times if you're in an area that's soft. All right, we set up for our landing. We're essentially going to do pretty much a soft field landing, which is going to be a nose high attitude with a little bit of power. We touch down, we're going to carry some power that helps hold the tail down and helps soften the touchdown. Also, that power is going to keep the airplane moving forward, so if the snow is soft, the skis will continue to kind of plane up. We don't want it to sink, especially if it's deep snow. So after we touch, we'll just give it a little bit of power to keep the airplane moving, somewhere around 5 to 10 miles an hour. If it's deeper snow, then you're going to want to keep it moving a little bit faster. And of course, your radiuses are going to be wider, so you have to allow for more room to turn if the snow is deeper. This snow is fairly shallow. All right, we're starting our round out. Going to our flare, we're just going to carry a little bit of power. And then the airplane is going to touch down. As it starts to decelerate, I'm going to leave that power in there, even add a little bit more. I'm going to relax the stick a little bit, kind of keep that tail light so we can blow it around the turn. It'll help us make our turn. I'm going to jink to the right, a little bit of power coming into the turn, back around to the left, inside rudder, a little outside, back to the inside again. There we go. We're going to go right back into our own tracks again, carrying forward stick right now to keep that tail light. If I wanted to slow down, I could pull that stick back and bury that tail wheel, and that would act as a brake. And we're coming around, we power up a little bit in the turn, a little too much side slide, I square it off a little bit. I'm relaxing that stick. The tail's going to start to come up a little bit, but I'm going to keep it nose high. I need a little continual back stick just to keep the tail from rising, and then just kind of hold that pitch attitude and the plane will take itself off the ground. If you get too slow on the touchdown and the snow's real deep, the plane's going to start to sink. So you may have to keep some power in there to keep the airplane moving. After you touch down, you want to try to make a turn. I try to make my turns to the left as much as possible because it'll turn tighter to the left. And then turn around and right back in your own tracks again. So my power's off, I'm rounding out. As the plane starts to settle in, I'm just going to bring a little power in. And just wait for it to touch. There it is, right there. That starts to decelerate, a little bit of power, and relax my stick a little bit to keep that tail floaty. Some forward stick here, a little power into the turn. If I get too much side slide, I'm just going to square it off momentarily. And the reason for limiting the side slide is so that we don't put too much side load on the landing gear, which can damage it. Or you can topple the airplane in the worst case. If you catch something under the snow, you can do some real damage. If I have to stop, then what I'll do is I'll pull back into my own tracks. And you always want to leave the airplane in a position where you don't have to make a turn from a dead stop. You want to be able to get it moving first. And we'll leave it in a position so that once we get moving, we can just go right into a takeoff roll. So if I wanted to stop, I could stop right here. I'm back in my own tracks. Then what I'll do is I'll let the skis cool down a little bit because they build heat. And as they cool down, they could actually start sticking to the snow. So I'm going to let the skis cool a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is just pull it forward again in my own tracks. Now I can get out and walk away from the airplane. If I'm going to leave the plane for any extended period of time, then I want to put something underneath those skis just so they don't freeze in. Let's say you get stuck and you need to get it unstuck. If it's just a little sticky, like maybe you walked away from the airplane and you know, it's not stuck real bad and you're in it and it's running, you can try to unstick it by adding power, bringing your stick forward, raising the tail. And you just kind of bring the stick forward and aft and just kind of bounce that tail up and down, and at the same time wiggle the rudders. And a lot of times that'll just kind of wiggle the airplane and break you free. If you're stuck real bad, that'll be evident because you'll have buried a ski, usually in a turn. And if that happens, then what you have to do is shut down, get out, and try to lift the wing up and shovel some snow underneath that ski. And then also, once that's back up, then get the snowshoes out and mat an area down in front of the airplane, enough room so that you can get the airplane moving up on plane again. So you do it till you think you have enough done, and then do it some more. That's where the snowshoes really are an invaluable tool. You need to have a snowshoes and a shovel with you, because if you get stuck, it can be a tremendous amount of work. It's also a lot better if you have somebody with you, because in a plane like this, somebody can lift the wing up actually, and you can kind of get that ski up and out of the snow. We're going to try to get ourselves unstuck here. So what we're going to do is add power and raise and lower that tail and wiggle the rudders at the same time. If I'm landing on a surface that's a bit slicker and I touch down and I feel like I'm just moving a little too fast and maybe I'm running out of runway, what you can do is after you touch down, you want to obviously bring that stick back to bury that tail wheel, try to slow down. The other thing you do is start carving some S's, kind of like a downhill skier does to control speed. Just keep them nice and shallow, but you can make lots of them. And that'll help burn off a lot of speed also. Another thing you want to watch for is your engine temps. When you're doing a lot of takeoffs and landings on snow, it could take, in this plane, 1,800, 2,000 RPM just to move the airplane. And the engine can actually overheat even though it's cold out because you're carrying lots of power and you're not moving forward very fast. So you want to keep an eye on the oil temperature. If you get stuck in a flat light situation, you lose your depth perception basically. Everything on the ground is white. You could be in a shadow or just an overcast sky. And the best thing to do is not land. But if you have to, and you have the room, then what you're going to do is essentially what would be a glassy water landing on floats. What I would do is set up a pitch attitude about 5 degrees or so nose high with a predetermined power setting. In this plane, we're going to use about 1,400 RPM, almost 1,500. And we just hold that attitude and wait. And it's going to eat up some distance, but you just wait and wait and wait and just hold that attitude till the skis touch down. There's our ground contact, and I can throttle back.
Before we get going, I like to ramp an area out in front of my airplane. I'll just strap on the snowshoes and have at it. I'll ramp out an area large enough so that I'll be able to get the airplane moving at least 5 miles an hour, so that once I leave that area, it'll continue to plane up on the snow. Turns in a confined area can be made easier if you have a second person with you. What you can do is one person gets out of the airplane, hold back on a strut, while the other person runs the throttle and basically pulses the throttle with full rudder. You can push back on the strut and act as a pivot, and the airplane will turn around you. If you find yourself alone, take some rope, wrap it around the front of the ski between the pedestal and the forward check cable and bungee. Use some forward stick, add power with full rudder. As the airplane pulls forward, the rope will pull back against the pedestal. It'll act like a brake. The airplane will pivot around that rope in a very tight turn. Should you find yourself in a situation where your turning radius exceeds your available space, or you're heading for the bushes, you have to make a judgment call. You can either throttle back and hope that you don't hit them, or we can try to tighten our turn by using forward stick, full rudder, and very aggressive power. If I'm going to be flying in a more remote area or landing on a frozen lake, some things I like to take along with me in the airplane would be a breakdown come-along, a shovel, about 100 feet of rope, and some ice screws. If I find myself stuck in an overflow, or even in just a precarious situation where I can't get the airplane unstuck or turned easily, what I'll do is sink an ice screw in an area where it's dry. The ice screws are about 8.5 to 9 inches long, and they're rated for around 2,000 pounds. I'll attach a rope to the tail tie down, walk it back, attach the come-along, and pull the airplane out rearward. If you find yourself in a flat light condition, some things that would be helpful would be land closer to a tree line. As you can see by these shots, as you get closer to the ground, it becomes much tougher to determine your height, and also depth perception becomes a problem. So if I land closer to a tree line, I'll have a better idea where the ground is. If you're in a wide open area, then you can fly over your intended landing site and drop something out of the airplane. I like to use garbage bags with some rocks in them. They don't weigh much, they're easy to store. When you throw the bags out, take a look and watch them go into the snow. That can help you determine the depth and perhaps the consistency of the snow. Come back around and then land next to the garbage bags. Thank you for joining us for Ski Flying 101. Flying on skis is an awful lot of fun, and I hope you get a chance to fly on skis this winter.